After my husband betrayed me with my closest friend, I lost everything. My career, my home, even my self-respect. He told me I'd never stand on my feet again. Broken and staying in a cheap motel, I stumbled upon an old suitcase with my name tag. Inside were $70,000 in cash, a plane ticket and a note. This is only the beginning. The real treasure awaits at this address. When I got there, what I discovered changed my life forever. The first thing I remember is the smell of burnt coffee. It filled our kitchen the morning everything changed. Mark stood by the counter, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice the smoke rising from the pot. He used to tease me for burning breakfast. Now he just looked bored. When he finally glanced up, his smile was polite, the kind you give a stranger on a bus. "Don't forget Lila's coming over later," he said. I nodded, trying to sound casual. I remember. But inside, something in me stirred. Something small and uneasy, like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. I'd known Lila since high school. She was the kind of woman who could make a grocery run feel like a grand adventure. Mark used to say she brought the fun back into our lives after my mother's passing. And maybe for a while she did. But lately, every time she came over, I felt like a guest in my own home. That morning, as I set out plates for brunch, I noticed Mark had shaved twice. He never did that for me anymore. The sink was still wet, the aftershave sharp in the air. I told myself it didn't mean anything. He just wanted to look decent. Still, when I wiped the counter, my hand trembled slightly. Lila arrived right on time, her perfume entering before she did. It was sweet and heavy, the same scent that had been clinging to Mark's shirts lately. She hugged me tight, her earrings brushing my cheek. "You look tired, Maggie. Are you sleeping okay?" The concern in her voice was soft but off-key, like a practiced line in a bad play. "I'm fine," I said. "Just been busy." Mark came out of the hallway, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. That look, small, quick but real, told me more than words ever could. He poured her coffee before mine. She laughed too loudly at his jokes. And I sat there, smiling, tasting ashes with every sip. After brunch, Lila helped me clear the table. She hummed while washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up, water running over her hands. Mark lingered nearby, pretending to check emails, but his reflection on the microwave glass betrayed him. He was watching her. I saw it. And for the first time I let the thought form fully. It's her. That evening, when they left together for a quick errand, I told myself not to follow. But I did. I drove slowly, headlights dimmed, my pulse loud in my ears. They parked near the river, the one where we used to take walks after dinner. From the car window, I saw him brush a strand of hair from her face. The tenderness of it broke me more than any affair ever could. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, frozen, while the water shimmered with streetlight reflections. A couple jogged past my car, laughing, and I envied their ignorance. When I finally drove home, I parked crookedly and went inside without turning on the lights. The silence in our living room felt heavier than grief. The next morning, Mark acted like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek before leaving for work, his lips cold, his voice bright. "I transferred some money to cover bills," he said. "Don't stress yourself." It wasn't kindness, it was control. He had been moving pieces quietly, and I was only now seeing the board. That afternoon, I opened the kitchen drawer looking for scissors and found an envelope addressed to him from our joint bank. Inside were statements, transactions I didn't recognize. Withdrawals from my savings, transfers to a new account in his name. The dates lined up with Lila's weekend trips. I held the paper so tight it wrinkled under my fingers. When he came home, I placed the envelope on the counter. "What is this?" He didn't flinch. He just smiled, that same polite smile. "Relax, Maggie. You've been under stress. I'm just managing things better now." Managing things. As if our life were a company and I was the outdated employee being quietly replaced. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "You should have told me." His shrug was casual, practiced. "You'd overreact." That word, overreact, landed like a slap. It was the same word he'd used when I cried at my mother's funeral, when I begged him to visit the doctor, when I asked him to talk to me like he used to. It meant be quiet. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, counting seconds between his breaths. He slept soundly beside me, his hand occasionally brushing mine, and I wondered if guilt ever kept him up. Probably not. Men like Mark don't lose sleep, they lose interest. The next morning, Evelyn dropped by. Mark's mother never came without calling, but she looked worried. She brought a pie and sat across from me, her eyes searching my face. "Are you all right, dear?" I wanted to tell her everything. The perfume, the river, the lies. But I couldn't. Instead I said, "You raised a good man." Her eyes clouded and she sighed softly. "Just remember, people can change in ways we don't expect." She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were cold but firm. "If things ever feel wrong, keep your records and your name." I didn't understand what she meant then. But I nodded anyway. A week later she passed away suddenly. Stroke, they said. Mark barely cried. At the funeral, Lila stood beside him offering tissues. Everyone thought it was kindness. I knew better. After that, our home became quiet. Mark worked longer hours. The laughter that used to fill the house now echoed only from the television. I spent my days gardening, pulling weeds from dry soil, trying to make something beautiful grow from dirt that no longer felt like mine. Sometimes I caught sight of myself in the window, tired eyes, hands trembling slightly, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. One afternoon Lila called. Her tone was too bright, too familiar. "Mark said you're thinking of selling the house. Is that true?" I froze. "No. Why would I?" She laughed nervously. "Oh, maybe he was joking. You know how he is." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring at the wall. He was already planning my exit. That night I made dinner, his favorite roast, and waited. He arrived late, smelling faintly of wine and her perfume. When he complimented the meal, I smiled and said nothing. For the first time, silence felt powerful. He didn't notice. He was too busy talking about a business trip next weekend. I nodded. "You should go. A change of scenery might help." He smiled, relieved that I wasn't fighting back. He mistook my calm for defeat. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at our wedding photo on the wall. We looked so young, so certain. I touched the frame, tracing his smile with my fingertip, and whispered, "You took everything I gave you and called it a favor." Then I opened my notebook, the one where I used to jot down grocery lists, and started writing dates, names, places. Not because I had a plan, but because I needed proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. Days blurred together after that. Mark grew colder, more distant. He started leaving small notes about bills and chores instead of talking. Lila texted often, little messages like, "Take care of yourself." Each word felt like salt on a wound. I stopped replying. The garden outside began to wilt and I let it. There was something honest about watching things die naturally. At night, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to cicadas and wondering how long people could pretend before they forgot who they were. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window and saw not the woman Mark had broken, but someone waiting. Someone learning silence could be armor. The morning it all truly cracked, he came home early. He tossed his briefcase onto the couch and said almost casually, "I think we need some time apart." My throat tightened, but my voice stayed even. "You already took that time. You just forgot to tell me." He blinked, surprised by my tone. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." He looked at me the way a landlord looks at a tenant whose lease has expired. And just like that, our marriage ended, not with shouting or tears but with indifference. I stood there holding the coffee mug, realizing the life I'd built was gone, and the person who destroyed it was still asking me to clean up the mess. When he walked out that door, the smell of his aftershave lingered in the air. I stood in that silence for a long time, until the ticking of the clock became unbearable. Then I whispered to myself, "He thinks it's over." I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing. The fracture had begun and there was no going back. When Mark left that morning, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the echo after a door slams shut. Final, hollow, irreversible. The smell of his aftershave still floated in the kitchen, sharp and cold. I sat there at the table, hands around an empty mug, wondering when my house had stopped feeling like mine. The day passed in fragments. The sound of the mail slot clicking. The neighbor's dog barking. The fridge humming like it was trying to fill the silence with anything. I moved around the rooms picking up random things. A tie, a half-folded shirt, a coffee spoon with lipstick that wasn't my color. That tiny mark on silver. That was the first truth I couldn't ignore. By evening, I found myself standing in front of our closet. Mark's side was immaculate. Shirts arranged by color, shoes polished. My side looked tired like me. As I ran my hand over the shirts, something fell from the pocket of his blazer. A receipt from a small boutique uptown. One bottle of perfume. Lila's favorite brand. I stared at it so long the number started to blur. The next day she came over as if summoned by fate. The doorbell rang just as I finished watering the plants. When I opened the door she stood there smiling, holding a paper bag. "I brought you some muffins," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Her perfume filled the hallway immediately, sweet, thick, unmistakable. It was the same scent from the receipt, from his shirts, from the lies. We sat at the kitchen table like always. She talked about everything and nothing, her new haircut, the traffic, the weather. I nodded, pretending to listen, watching her hands move. There was a new ring on her finger, not an engagement one, but expensive. I'd never seen it before. When she noticed me looking, she laughed lightly. "A little gift to myself," she said. Her voice cracked just slightly on the word gift. Mark came home earlier than usual that evening. He froze when he saw her sitting there. It was only for a second, but it was enough. Then came the quick recovery. "Lila. Didn't expect to see you here." She smiled. "I was in the area." I poured coffee for all three of us. The sound of the liquid hitting the cups was louder than our breathing. They exchanged small talk, safe words, harmless laughter. But their eyes betrayed them. I caught glances too long to be friendly, smiles too rehearsed. When I looked down, my hands were trembling. Not with anger, yet, but with awareness. I wasn't imagining this. The walls around me weren't safe anymore. Later that night, after she left, I found him standing in the yard with his phone. When he came back inside, I asked, "Who were you talking to?" He didn't even blink. "Work." Always the same answer. Then he kissed my forehead the way people calm children. The gesture stung worse than a slap. The next morning I woke up to the sound of his keys jingling. He said he was leaving early, had a meeting out of town. His suitcase was packed too neatly for a day trip. When I reached to help him, he pulled it away. "I've got it." He smiled, gentle, practiced, and walked out. I stood at the window until his car disappeared down the road. That afternoon I cleaned. Not out of habit, but to keep my hands busy, my mind from collapsing. When I lifted the laundry basket, something fell to the floor. One of his shirts. It smelled faintly of Lila's perfume again, but stronger this time, layered with her body lotion, the one she always carried in her purse. My fingers clenched around the fabric. There was no denying it anymore. The doorbell rang again just after sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, it was Lila. She stood there smiling, holding a bottle of wine. "Mark texted, said you might need company." My stomach tightened. I forced a smile. "That's nice of you." She stepped inside like she belonged there. Her confidence made my skin crawl. We sat by the window, the wine untouched between us. She talked and talked, her words rushing out like she was filling space she didn't deserve. I watched her face carefully, the way her lips trembled slightly whenever she mentioned Mark's name. When she excused herself to the restroom, I noticed her phone buzzing on the table. A message lit up the screen. "Mark, she doesn't suspect a thing." For a moment I couldn't move. Then I exhaled, slowly, carefully, as if breathing wrong might give me away. When she returned, I smiled. "Everything all right?" She nodded quickly, too quickly. Her hands shook as she reached for her glass. "I should go soon," she said. "Stay," I replied. "Mark will be home soon. You can say hello." Her eyes widened for just a second, and that tiny flicker of panic gave me more satisfaction than I expected. But I didn't show it. Not yet. After she left, I went upstairs and sat on the edge of our bed. The sheets smelled like both of them now. I wanted to strip them off, throw everything away. But instead I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out the small notebook I'd started days ago. Tonight I wrote one line: "She knows I know nothing. But I do." The following days were quiet. Too quiet. Mark's texts grew shorter. Lila stopped calling. The distance between their guilt and my silence stretched tight, almost musical. I played the part of the oblivious wife perfectly, making dinner, watering plants, smiling when needed. Every gesture of normalcy became a mask, and behind it I was learning the art of waiting. Then came Friday. He returned home late, his tie loosened, eyes heavy but not from work. When he dropped his jacket on the chair, something slid from the pocket, a small silver keychain shaped like a heart. Not mine. Not ours. When he saw me looking, he said, "Client gift." His voice cracked slightly. I smiled, nodded, said nothing. Inside I memorized every lie. That night as he showered I checked his phone. No text from her. Smart. But his photo gallery told a different story. A picture of Lila's car parked by the river. Another of her reflection in a cafe window, taken secretly. And one more, her hand on his, their wedding rings absent. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply powered off the phone and placed it back exactly where I found it. When he came out, towel around his waist, he asked if I was all right. Just tired, I said. He smiled, relief flickering across his face. Then he turned away, humming softly as if nothing had changed. I watched him through the mirror, my reflection behind his. We looked like strangers living in a photograph that no longer belonged on the wall. The next morning I woke before him. The dawn light crept through the curtains, dust floating like snow. I walked quietly to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The refrigerator hummed, the world ordinary again. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't just hurt, I was awake. At breakfast he acted cheerful, asking about errands, bills, mundane things. I answered calmly, even laughed once or twice. He seemed relieved, believing my quiet was forgiveness. But it wasn't forgiveness. It was calculation. When he left for another trip, I watched his car disappear again, but this time I didn't feel emptiness. I felt clarity. Hours later Lila called. Her voice sounded careful, testing the ground. "Everything okay between you and Mark?" she asked. I let a pause stretch just long enough to make her uneasy. "We're fine," I said softly. "Why?" "Oh, no reason. He seems distant lately." The irony almost made me laugh. She hesitated, then added, "You really should take better care of him." Her tone carried that same artificial sweetness. I replied, "You're right. I should." She didn't catch the undertone. He never did. When the call ended, I set the phone down slowly. The house was quiet again, but not heavy this time. It felt like a stage just before the curtain rises, breathless, still waiting. I looked around at the photos on the wall, the furniture he'd chosen, the spaces that once belonged to us. Now they were just props in a story I no longer believed in. The perfume still lingered in the hallway, faint but stubborn. It wasn't just a scent anymore. It was a reminder carved into air, into memory, into me. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt, what they thought I didn't know. But for now, silence was my shield. And if silence was a weapon, I was finally learning how to use it. The night I left, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No thrown suitcases. Just the quiet sound of a zipper closing and the weight of air that didn't belong to me anymore. Mark had gone to work early. I wrote a note that said nothing meaningful, "I'll be gone a few days." I didn't even sign it. The house looked cleaner without me in it, like it had already accepted my absence. I drove without direction, the steering wheel slick under my palms. It was late afternoon when I saw the faded sign, Harbor View Motel. There was no harbor. No view. Just peeling paint, humming neon, and a manager who didn't look up from her crossword when I asked for a room. "$40 a night," she said. "Cash only." Her name tag read Rita. Her voice was rough but not unkind. Room 12 smelled of dust and lemon cleaner. A single bulb buzzed overhead, and the curtains were drawn tight like they were afraid of daylight. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat for a long time listening to traffic fade. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. I turned on the bathroom light. The mirror was cracked down the middle, splitting my reflection in two. On one side, the woman I used to be, tidy, hopeful, composed. On the other, the woman who had nowhere left to go. I touched the glass and whispered, "So this is where you landed." My voice sounded foreign. That first night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise painted the cracks gold. Somewhere outside, a truck backfired and a dog barked, breaking the spell. I got up, washed my face with cold water, and promised myself I wouldn't cry again. I broke that promise before noon. Rita knocked once and left a paper cup of coffee by the door. No words, no questions. That small act of kindness made my chest ache more than Mark's betrayal ever had. Later I walked to the diner across the street. The waitress didn't ask if I was alone. She just poured coffee and said, "Rough day?" I nodded, grateful for the lie she didn't demand. When I went to pay, she slipped an extra slice of pie into the box. "On the house," she said. "You look like someone who needs something sweet." Her words stayed with me longer than the taste. Back in the room, I opened my phone. 32 missed calls, all from Mark. I stared at the screen until the battery died. He didn't deserve to know where I was, and I didn't deserve to explain. Evening came again, slow and blue. I sat by the small window watching headlights sweep across the parking lot. Each car that pulled in made me tense. Each engine fading away let me breathe again. On the third night, a storm rolled through. Rain hit the glass hard enough to rattle it. Water leaked from the corner of the ceiling, dripping into a bucket I found under the sink. The rhythm was almost comforting. I lay on the bed and listened, thinking of how rain used to sound on our old porch roof. Mark would stand beside me, coffee in hand, saying, "Listen to that, it's peaceful." I wondered if he was listening to rain somewhere else now with her. When the thunder finally passed, I stood in front of the mirror again. The light flickered, and for a moment my reflection looked like someone else entirely, older, harder. I traced the scar of the crack with my fingertip and said quietly, "She's gone." Meaning the woman who trusted. The one who forgave too quickly. The next morning I went to the front desk to extend my stay. Rita looked up for the first time. Her eyes were a soft gray, tired but alert. "You running from someone?" she asked. "From myself," I said before I could stop it. She nodded slowly. "That's the hardest kind." Then she handed me a new key and said, "Try room 9. The heater actually works." Room 9 smelled less like despair and more like dust and soap. Progress. I cleaned it, rearranged the few things I owned, folded my clothes neatly. Creating order in chaos. The only thing that still made sense. At night I watched TV on mute. Old sitcoms, canned laughter flickering across the screen. I mouthed along to lines I'd heard 1,000 times before, pretending the laughter was mine. Sometimes that helped. A few days later I went for a walk along the main road. A pawn shop, a laundromat, and a thrift store made up the entire strip. Inside the thrift store I found a used notebook with someone's grocery list still scribbled inside. Milk, bread, light bulbs, dog food. Ordinary things. I bought it for $1 and tore out the old pages. That night I started writing again. Not about Mark, not about Lila, but about how silence sounded at 2 a.m. and how coffee tasted like rust when you drank it alone. Each word felt like breathing underwater but still finding air. On the 6th day I finally turned my phone back on. No new messages. The absence was louder than any voicemail. I scrolled through old photos. Birthdays, vacations, the porch I once called home. I deleted them one by one until the gallery was empty. The phone felt lighter in my hand. Rita knocked again that evening, carrying another cup of coffee. "You're still here," she said softly. I nodded. "Guess I am." She hesitated, then asked, "You got anyone looking for you?" "Not anyone who'd come find me," I said. Her expression didn't change, but she slid a small chocolate bar across the counter anyway. "Then take this. Sugar helps the thinking." That night I dreamed of water again, not the storm this time but stillness. A lake at dawn, my reflection rippling gently. When I woke I didn't remember the last time I'd felt that calm. Days blended into each other. I started helping Rita with small things. Replacing light bulbs, folding sheets. She didn't pay me, but she let me stay longer at the same rate. It wasn't kindness for charity's sake. It was solidarity. Two women quietly holding each other's worlds together. Sometimes guests came through. Truck drivers, tired couples, salesmen. They'd nod politely, pass by. None of them noticed the woman behind the counter who was rebuilding piece by piece. One evening, while cleaning room 3, I found a photo stuck between the mattress and headboard. A family smiling in front of a Christmas tree. Someone's forgotten joy. I slid it into my notebook, not knowing why. Maybe to remind myself that happiness once looked like that and maybe could again. As days stretched into weeks, I learned small things about Rita. She'd lost her husband 10 years earlier. Ran the motel because she had nowhere else to go. She said it kept her busy enough not to think too much. I understood that perfectly. One afternoon she caught me staring at the mirror behind the reception desk. "You keep looking at yourself like you expect her to apologize," she said. "Who?" "The woman in there." I smiled weakly. "Maybe I do." Rita shrugged. "She won't. You'll just have to forgive her first." That night I sat in room 9, lights off, window cracked open. The wind carried the smell of rain and exhaust. I looked at the mirror again, faint outline glowing in the dark. For the first time I didn't flinch. The crack was still there, but it didn't divide me anymore. It framed me. A flaw turned into shape. I whispered to the reflection, "You're still standing." And somehow hearing it out loud made it true. A few days later, Rita handed me an envelope left at the front desk. "No return address," she said. "But it's got your name." My hands trembled as I took it. The handwriting looked familiar, looping, elegant. When I turned it over, I saw the faint imprint of a name I hadn't spoken in months. I looked up at Rita. "Who left it?" He shrugged. "Some delivery guy. Said it was found behind the vending machine." She smiled faintly. "Guess even lost things find their way back." I carried the envelope upstairs, heart pounding, rain tapping the window again like an old habit returning. Under the dim lamp, I tore it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Just one line written in graceful handwriting. "Go to this address." Below it, an address I'd never seen before. And tucked beside it, a small brass key, cold and heavy in my palm. I looked up, staring at the cracked mirror one more time. For the first time since leaving home, I saw something different in it. Not loss, not shame, but a direction. I didn't know where it led, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't broken anymore. The brass key was still warm in my hand when morning light broke through the curtains. I hadn't slept. I just sat there staring at that envelope, rereading the same words over and over. "Go to this address." No explanation. No signature. But the handwriting, I knew it. It was Evelyn's. The motel clock ticked louder than usual. Every sound felt amplified, as if the world wanted to make sure I didn't miss the meaning of this moment. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The key was heavy, real brass, old-fashioned, the kind used before everything became digital and cheap. It didn't fit the motel room door, nor the one downstairs. Whatever it belonged to, it wasn't here. Rita was at the front desk, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. She looked up as I approached. "Rough night?" she asked. "I'm not sure what kind of night it was," I said, managing a tired smile. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded toward the vending machine by the stairs. "You might want to check behind that old thing. We get all sorts of junk stuck back there." Her tone was casual, but her eyes said something else, like she already knew. I walked to the hallway. The machine stood against the wall, humming faintly, its lights flickering. When I crouched down, I saw it. A dusty brown suitcase wedged behind it, half hidden under a pile of forgotten magazines. There was a paper tag attached to the handle, yellowed and soft with age. On it, in fading ink, was my maiden name. Margaret Holt. My throat tightened. No one had called me that in years. I ran my thumb across the letters. The writing was neat, deliberate, and again unmistakably Evelyn's. I pulled the suitcase free and carried it to my room. The handle left a faint rust mark on my palm. When I set it on the bed, I just stared at it for a while, afraid to open it, afraid that whatever was inside might undo the fragile quiet I'd found here. Finally, I unlatched it. The clasps gave way with a tired click. Inside was money, stacks of it wrapped in paper bands. Not new bills. Old, worn ones, the kind that smelled faintly of attic dust and ink. Beside them, a single envelope with my name again, written in that same graceful hand. I tore it open slowly. Inside was a short letter. "If you are reading this, you have learned who he really is. He took from me what he could never repay. This is what he left behind, and what he was never meant to have. Go to this address. The truth waits there." Below it, an address in North Carolina. No explanation. No signature. But I didn't need one. Evelyn's voice was in every curve of the ink. I sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in my hands. Evelyn had died months ago. How could she have known I'd end up here? Had she planned this before she passed? Was this her way of warning me or saving me? I sat like that for what felt like hours, until the sun moved across the wall and touched the edge of the mirror. My reflection looked steadier than I felt. There was a knock on the door. Rita stood there, a cigarette between her fingers, eyes squinting against the hallway light. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't bother hiding it. I showed her the letter. She read it quietly, then nodded. "Looks like someone wants you to find whatever's waiting there. What if it's a mistake?" I whispered. She exhaled smoke slowly. "Then you'll know. But if it's not, maybe it's your road back." I packed my few belongings, a sweater, notebook, toothbrush. The suitcase with the money felt strange in my hands, like holding someone else's life. Rita helped me carry it to the car. As I opened the door, she said, "You'll be fine, Maggie." The sound of my name, my real name, made my eyes sting. "How do you know that?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Because you already left once. The next time's easier." The drive south felt endless. Flat roads, gas stations, old songs on the radio that didn't comfort me the way they used to. I kept thinking about Evelyn, her gentle eyes, the way she'd always watched Mark without fully trusting him. She must have seen what I refused to see. At one rest stop, I opened the suitcase again. The money was still there, untouched. But beneath it, tucked under the lining, I found something else. A photograph. It showed Evelyn standing in front of a small farmhouse, smiling faintly. The same address was handwritten on the back. By the time I reached the North Carolina border, the sky had turned the color of tarnished copper. The address led me off the highway, down a narrow road flanked by tall pine trees that whispered against each other in the wind. When I finally stopped, the farmhouse from the photograph stood in front of me. Its paint was peeling, its windows dusty, but it wasn't abandoned. A curtain shifted slightly upstairs like someone had just moved out of sight. I stepped out of the car, suitcase in hand. The ground was damp with yesterday's rain. Each step toward that porch felt heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated, heart pounding. Then I tried the brass key. It slid in easily, like it had been waiting for me. The hinges groaned as the door opened. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and cedar. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight that streamed through the cracks in the curtains. The living room looked frozen in time. A sofa draped with a knitted blanket, a clock stopped at 3:27, a framed photo of Mark as a boy sitting on a dusty mantel. I took a cautious step forward. There were boxes stacked neatly by the wall, each labeled in careful handwriting. Bank records, letters, ledger. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was evidence. I knelt beside one of the boxes and opened it. Inside were bank statements, deeds, and letters written by Evelyn to her lawyer. Each document pointed to the same truth. Mark had taken large sums from his mother's account years before her death. Money meant for her care, her medication, her home. He'd moved it quietly using fake business transfers, the same name now tied to our shared accounts. I sank to the floor, the paper trembling in my hands. Every lie he told me, about debt, about tight months, about how he was helping his mother, they all snapped together like glass shards, forming one brutal picture. In the corner, an old radio sat on a side table. When I touched it, it crackled to life, static giving way to a faint country tune. Evelyn used to hum that same melody when she cooked. For a moment I felt like she was there, not haunting, just guiding. I spent hours going through the papers, each one cutting deeper than the last. He'd stolen not just from her but from me, using my name as co-signer, funneling money into his private accounts. And yet she hadn't exposed him. She'd left this for me to find instead. Maybe she knew the truth had to come from the one he'd underestimated most. By evening the air grew colder. I found a blanket folded neatly on the couch and wrapped it around my shoulders. Through the window I could see the fading light painting the trees gold. It was beautiful in a quiet, lonely way, the kind of beauty that hurts a little because it's honest. Then I noticed something on the mantel, a small wooden box carved with initials. Inside was a photograph of Evelyn and me from years ago, both laughing at a picnic table. Behind it, a note folded tight. It said, "You were the daughter I wished I'd had. Finish what I couldn't." I pressed the paper against my chest, tears finally spilling. It wasn't just a letter. It was permission. When I looked around the room again, it felt different. Not like a stranger's house, but a place built for a purpose, for truth to surface. The ticking of the stopped clock seemed to start again, faint but steady. And in that stillness I realized something simple and terrifying. Evelyn hadn't left me money for survival. She'd left me tools for reckoning. I folded the documents neatly back into the suitcase and locked it. The brass key was still warm between my fingers, as if it held a pulse of its own. Outside, wind swept through the pine trees, whispering softly, a language I couldn't understand but somehow trusted. I turned off the lights, stood at the doorway and looked back once. The house didn't feel haunted. It felt awake. And so was I. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound echoed through the empty rooms like a breath held too long. Dust floated in thin shafts of sunlight, each particle moving slow, lazy, as if time itself was tired of keeping up. The house smelled of cedar, old paper, and something faintly floral, like Evelyn's perfume. I set the suitcase on the hallway floor. The boards creaked under its weight, under mine. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive, listening. I moved slowly, each step stirring up memories I never lived but somehow recognized. The wallpaper was peeling, patterned with faded roses, the same kind Evelyn had in her dining room. A half-burned candle sat on the mantel, wax hardened in a small pool. It looked as if someone had been here waiting for something, or someone. In the kitchen, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, painting the counter in uneven gold. A kettle sat on the stove, rust creeping up its edges. I ran my hand across the counter. It was dusty, but beneath the layer of neglect was order, neatness. The kind of discipline that outlives its owner. I found a small notebook beside the sink, the cover cracked with age. Inside were Evelyn's notes, careful handwriting, neat lists, groceries, reminders, dates. But near the end the tone changed. The lists turned into short entries. Confessions almost. He's lying again. The papers aren't what he says they are. I'll hide the truth before he destroys what's left. My fingers tightened around the page. The ink was smudged as if she'd written in a hurry or cried while doing it. I closed the notebook gently and placed it on the table like a fragile thing that still carried her heartbeat. The afternoon sun shifted. Outside, wind pushed through the pine trees, and they answered with a low, whispering sound. I followed it to the back of the house, where a narrow hallway led to a small office. The room smelled of ink and dust. A metal filing cabinet stood in the corner, paint chipped, drawers stiff with age. The keyhole glinted in the light, old brass. I reached into my pocket and tried the same key that had opened the front door. Fit. Inside were stacks of manila folders, each labeled in Evelyn's tidy script. Dates, names, account numbers. I spread them across the desk. One name appeared again and again, Mark H. Davis. My husband. There were bank records, transfers, withdrawals, checks written to companies that didn't exist. Some had my forged signature on them. He'd stolen from her, then from me with the same confidence he used when kissing my forehead goodnight. I leaned back in the chair trying to breathe, but the air felt heavy with ghosts. Every lie he'd told came flooding back, reassembled in perfect order, the way Evelyn must have seen it years before me. I reached for another folder labeled medical. It contained receipts for unpaid bills, notes from doctors recommending treatments she never received. He'd drained her accounts while she was sick. He'd left her to fade quietly, telling everyone she wanted simplicity. My hands trembled so badly I had to set the folder down. In the corner of the room sat a wooden chair, draped in a faded quilt. It was Evelyn's. I recognized the pattern. She'd sewn it herself, squares of fabric cut from old dresses. I touched the edge of it, and for a brief second I could almost hear her voice, calm, measured, gentle. Don't let anyone make you small. I turned when I heard the sound, soft, almost hesitant, from upstairs. The house groaned, settling. But then came another noise, a faint creak, deliberate. I froze. Hello. My voice sounded thin in the stillness. No reply. I waited a few seconds before climbing the stairs, one step at a time. The railing was cold under my hand. At the top there were 3 doors. The first opened to a bedroom filled with light, simple, untouched. The second, a small guest room with faded floral sheets. The third door stuck halfway before giving way with a reluctant sigh. It was a study. The window overlooked the pine grove behind the house. A single chair faced the glass, as if someone used to sit there just to watch the world go quiet. A framed picture hung crooked on the wall. Evelyn and a boy. Mark at 10 years old. His smile innocent, his arm around her neck. The sight hit harder than any document could. I sank into the chair by the window. Outside, wind brushed through the trees in long, sweeping waves. The sound was steady, comforting in its constancy. How could the world keep moving when people like Evelyn had to stop? Footsteps approached from behind. I turned sharply, but it was just a man, older, carrying a basket of mail. He paused in the doorway, startled to see me. Didn't think anyone still lived here, he said, adjusting his cap. I don't, I replied softly. Just visiting. He frowned. You related to the lady who owned this place? Yes, I said after a pause. In a way. He nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. Good woman. kept to herself. Came by the post office every Friday. Last thing she mailed out was a box. Said it was for her daughter-in-law. He scratched his chin. That box ever make it? My chest tightened. Maybe. He smiled faintly. She talked about you, you know. Said you had kind eyes. Said you'd need the truth one day. He handed me an old letter yellowed at the edges. Found this in our return bin last month. No one ever picked it up. When he left, I stood there for a long time before opening it. It was another note, shorter this time. He took what belonged to me. I can't undo the past, but you can stop the rest. Find the ledger. Trust the records. They're your protection. At the bottom, her initials, I wiped my eyes, folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive with purpose. She'd left me the map and I'd walked straight into it. Evening came fast. I turned on the small lamp in the study. Its light cast long shadows across the papers. The wind outside had settled, leaving only the steady tick of the broken clock downstairs. I worked through every document, reading until my eyes blurred. At one point I found a small tin box hidden beneath the floorboard, a key taped to its lid. Inside were photographs, a bank stamp, and a notebook filled with Evelyn's neat handwriting. Each page recorded details of transactions, every dollar mark moved, every lie disguised as business. The weight of it all pressed against me, but beneath that weight was clarity. I wasn't powerless anymore. The same man who'd looked me in the eyes and called me unstable had built his empire on deception. And his mother, the woman he'd wronged, had handed me the truth like a weapon wrapped in kindness. Downstairs I made tea with water from the rusted tap. The kettle whistled weakly, a tired song. I carried the cup to the porch and sat under the fading sky. Pine needles swayed gently in the breeze, whispering secrets to each other. The sun dipped lower, bathing the world in orange. Somewhere in the distance a car door slammed. I straightened, listening. But no one came up the path. Only the sound of wind and the slow chirping of crickets. I exhaled, the steam from my cup mixing with the evening air. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. I felt present, grounded, like every bruise had turned into a map leading me here. Inside, I placed the ledger, letters, and photographs neatly into the suitcase. When I closed it, the sound was final, like the end of a chapter. I stood there in the quiet room, surrounded by Evelyn's presence, her strength, her calm defiance that somehow lived on through ink and paper. A single thought pulsed steady in my chest. Not anger, not sorrow, just resolve. The truth was finally in my hands. And with it, the power he'd spent years trying to take from me. I turned off the lamp, the house dim again except for moonlight spilling through the windows. The pines outside swayed gently, whispering as though they knew what was coming. I listened for a while, not to the ghosts, not to the lies, but to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and sure. When I finally stepped outside, suitcase in hand, the night air felt different. Sharper, clearer, almost cleansing. The porch creaked beneath my weight, the boards cool under bare feet. Behind me, the house stood still among the trees, a keeper of secrets and proof of one woman's courage. I locked the door and slipped the brass key into my pocket. The metal was cold now but steady, like it belonged there. As I walked toward the car, the wind rose again, brushing past my hair, carrying with it a scent that felt like memory. Cedar, paper, and that faint floral perfume. Evelyn. I didn't look back this time. Some houses don't need witnesses when they've already spoken. The drive back felt longer than it should have. The road wound through pine and fog, every turn whispering its own secret. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence. Real silence. Not the kind that hides things, but the kind that forces you to listen to yourself. When I reached the motel, the neon sign flickered weakly. Rita was behind the counter, sorting through a stack of keys. She looked up, studied my face, and didn't ask where I'd been. Instead, she just nodded toward the back room. "There's fresh coffee," she said. "Simple, steady." That's what I needed. Something ordinary to hold on to. I carried the suitcase inside and set it on the bed. The air smelled faintly of rain and old fabric. For a while I just stood there staring at it, the brass lock catching the light like a quiet heartbeat. Then I opened my laptop. I hadn't touched it in weeks. The screen lit up, and with it so did every ghost I'd been avoiding. Emails, bank notifications, old photos Mark had once sent me just to make me smile. They all felt like fingerprints on glass. I opened the first account file, then another, then another. Evelyn's ledgers weren't just records, they were maps. Each document pointed to another layer of deceit. Investments that didn't exist, shell companies tied to my name, false signatures on papers I'd never seen. Every file I opened was another thread, and together they formed something massive. A web spun with my husband's arrogance. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. He hadn't just stolen from his mother. He'd built his entire world on lies. Every promotion, every client, every gift he'd ever bragged about. It was all borrowed truth. Around midnight I printed everything I had. The pages filled the small motel desk, fluttering slightly from the fan's low hum. I stood there staring down at his life in paper form, expensive lies that suddenly looked so cheap. When I finally sat, exhaustion hit. Not the kind that comes from lack of sleep, but from too much remembering. I leaned forward, face in my hands, trying to make sense of what came next. A knock startled me. It was light, careful. When I opened the door, Rita stood there holding a plastic bag with sandwiches and 2 bottles of water. "You've been working all night," she said softly. I nodded. "Feels like I've been working my whole life." She didn't pry. She just set the bag on the table and said, "Be careful with whatever you're digging up. People lie like they breathe, they don't stop unless someone takes their air." Then she left, the door clicking quietly behind her. Her words stayed with me long after she was gone. The next morning I decided to call Mark's office. I used a payphone across the street. No digital trace, no history. When the receptionist answered, I asked for him, disguising my voice as best I could. "He's in meetings all day," she said brightly. "Would you like to leave a message?" I hung up without replying. He was still living his life. Still pretending nothing had broken. I walked back to the motel, the sun high and cruel, and sat down at the small desk again. If he could lie that easily, then I could learn from him. I opened a new email account under a fake name. Then, using Evelyn's documents, I wrote an anonymous message addressed to his company's financial department. The subject line was simple: internal irregularities, immediate review required. I attached only a few pages, just enough to open the first crack. Not all of it. Not yet. Then I hit send. My hands shook afterward, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity, inevitable and overdue. That evening, as the sun bled orange through the blinds, I opened the small notebook where I'd started keeping thoughts again. I wrote, "The truth is patient. Lies get tired first." Days passed quietly, each one heavier with tension I couldn't see but could feel. Then on the 4th morning my phone buzzed. An unknown number. For a moment I almost didn't answer. "Margaret." His voice. Smooth, deliberate, but fraying at the edges. I said nothing. He sighed. "I know you're angry. I know what this looks like, but..." I hung up. 2 minutes later, another call. Then another. I turned the phone off. By afternoon an email came through, not from him but from someone in his office. A polite corporate notice. "Please confirm your involvement in these financial documents recently brought to our attention." My heart pounded. It was working. The cracks were spreading. That night I went for a walk. The motel parking lot was quiet, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt. Rita sat outside smoking. When she saw me, she motioned for me to sit beside her. "Looks like you finally started breathing again," she said. I smiled faintly. "Feels like it. Maybe for the first time in years." She nodded toward the sky. "It's strange, isn't it? The stars don't care what we've lost. But they keep shining anyway." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next day another email, this one colder. "Immediate internal audit scheduled. Contact required." And then hours later one from Mark himself. "What did you do, Maggie? They're tearing everything apart. You have no idea what you've started." I read it 3 times. Then deleted it. His panic tasted sweeter than I expected. But underneath that sweetness something deeper stirred. Guilt, maybe. Not for him but for who I used to be. The woman who once believed love was enough to excuse everything. I spent that night rereading Evelyn's letters, tracing her words with my finger. She'd known this would happen. She'd known her son would fall, and she'd trusted me to be the one who didn't look away. By the end of the week the silence broke again. A text. From an unknown number. "We need to talk. Now." I ignored it. Then another. "Please. I can explain everything." I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, letting his desperation seep through the glow of the screen before I powered it down again. He wanted control, the one thing he'd lost completely. The following morning there was a knock at my door. Rita peeked in holding a newspaper. "You might want to see this," she said. The headline was small, tucked into the business section. "Local firm launches internal fraud investigation." No names mentioned yet, but I didn't need them. The truth was unfolding, slowly, beautifully. I looked up at Rita. She gave a small smile. "Guess someone's air just ran out." I didn't laugh, but the corner of my mouth twitched. It was enough. Later that day I gathered all the remaining files, sorted them into envelopes, labeled each one neatly, names, dates, transactions. Then I placed everything in a small lockbox, the brass key hanging from a thin red string. It wasn't about destroying him anymore. It was about finishing what Evelyn started, turning lies into evidence, silence into proof. Evening came, soft and gray. The motel lights flickered on one by one. I brewed tea, sat by the window and watched rain start to fall again. The same kind of rain that once made me ache now felt different, cleansing, deliberate. Somewhere out there he was watching everything collapse. And somewhere deeper inside me I realized I didn't need to see it happen to feel it. I reached for the notebook again and wrote a single line. "He taught me how to hide. She taught me how to reveal." Then I closed it. Outside, thunder rolled once in the distance. Low, steady, patient. It sounded almost like applause. The storm came before dawn. Rain hammered the motel roof like it was trying to wash the world clean, and maybe it was. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold, watching lightning slice through the sky. It felt right. The noise, the chaos, the world finally sounding the way I felt inside. By noon the rain stopped. The silence afterward was strange, too perfect. Then my phone lit up again, this time not with a number but a name. Mark. For a long moment I just stared at it. I could have ignored him. I could have blocked him. But I wanted to hear the sound of his voice when he realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. I answered. "Maggie." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I just need to talk. Please. Everything's a mess right now. They're saying things that aren't true." I didn't reply. He continued, desperation creeping in. "It's all lies. You know how corporate politics work. Someone's trying to destroy me." Finally I spoke. My voice was calm. "Someone already did." He went quiet. Then softer. "You don't understand, this could ruin me." "You already ruined yourself," I said. He started to protest, but I hung up before he could find another lie to hide behind. Minutes later my phone buzzed again. A message this time. "I'm coming there." I set the phone down. The teacup rattled slightly in my hand, not from fear but from adrenaline. I didn't plan to run. I didn't plan to hide. If he wanted to come, let him. The truth didn't belong to him anymore. By evening, headlights cut across the motel parking lot. A black sedan pulled up fast, tires spitting gravel. The door opened and there he was, drenched from the rain, suit wrinkled, eyes wild. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in size, in presence. Like a man who'd been stripped of everything that made him feel powerful. I opened my door before he could knock. He stood there, breathing hard. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside, motioning him in. "Then talk." He looked around the small room, disgust flickering across his face. "This is where you've been staying?" His tone almost made me laugh. Even now he couldn't help but judge. "It's quiet," I said. "I like quiet." He rubbed a hand across his face, water dripping from his hair. "You sent those files, didn't you?" "Evelyn sent them," I replied. The mention of her name froze him. He blinked, startled. "What are you talking about?" "She left them for me," I said. "Every document, every account, every signature you forged. She knew." He sank onto the edge of the bed, running a shaking hand through his hair. "She hated me," he muttered. "You think she didn't take from me too?" She loved you," I interrupted. "And you used that love like a loan you never intended to repay." He looked up at me then, truly looked. For a second I saw the man I once loved hiding behind those eyes. But only for a second. "Do you want money?" he asked. "Is that what this is about?" I laughed quietly. "You think I'd crawl through this mess just to be paid off?" He stood, anger flashing. "You think you're some kind of hero, Maggie? You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing." I know what it's like to watch someone take everything, I said steady. He paced, hands clenched, voice trembling with fury and fear. They're investigating me. Freezing my accounts. My reputation wasn't yours to begin with. He stopped moving. His eyes narrowed. You think you can destroy me? I don't have to, I said softly. You already did that. He lunged toward the table, grabbing one of the envelopes of documents I'd left there. This is what you sent? He shouted, waving the papers. I nodded. Just enough to make them start looking. The rest is safe. He slammed the papers down, his voice cracking. Why, Maggie? After everything we had, why? I took a step closer. Because you taught me that silence keeps monsters alive. For a long time neither of us moved. Rain started again outside, soft this time, a whisper instead of a scream. He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed, jaw tight. You don't know what they'll do to me. I tilted my head. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to lose something that can't be replaced. He flinched like the words hit him physically. Then, voice low, he said, You'll regret this. I met his gaze. I already regret everything before this. He turned away, pacing again. His reflection flickered in the mirror. Two versions of him, one angry, one afraid. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. You could have come to me. We could have fixed it. There's no fixing theft, I said. Or betrayal. Or the part of me you convinced to stay quiet while you burned down everything that wasn't yours. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just a shuddering breath, like something had finally broken loose inside him. When he finally left, he didn't slam the door. He just walked out, shoulders hunched, rain soaking through his clothes, disappearing into the gray night. I stood at the window watching the red taillights fade. My body trembled, but not from fear, from release. It was over, or at least the part that required words. I turned back to the table and gathered the remaining files into the suitcase. Everything was still where I'd left it. Evelyn's notes, the ledgers, the letter she'd written to me. The only thing missing was the weight I'd carried for too long. Hours later, a knock came again, sharp, impatient. I opened the door expecting Rita, but instead there stood Lila. Her makeup streaked, eyes swollen, voice brittle. What did you do, Maggie? My stomach tightened. What are you doing here? They're investigating me too, she said, voice rising. They froze my account, my savings, my job. You helped him, I said simply. She shook her head violently. I didn't know. He told me it was temporary. He said it was all legal. Her panic filled the room like smoke, choking and frantic. Please, she begged. Tell them it wasn't me. You have to. You know me. I looked at her. The woman who used to laugh in my kitchen. The woman whose perfume had lingered on my husband's shirt. And for the first time I didn't feel hatred. I felt pity. You chose him over me, I said softly. Now you're learning who he really is. She started crying, covering her face with her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen. I believed her. But I didn't forgive her. Go home, Lila, I said. Whatever's left of it. When she didn't move, I walked to the door and opened it wider. The sound of rain rushed in, cold and relentless. She looked at me through tears, then turned and left without another word. Her car disappeared down the road the same way his had. The room felt different after they were both gone. Lighter, like air after a storm finally clears. I sat down on the edge of the bed, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, but it didn't scare me anymore. I'd already met the storm and survived it. On the nightstand, Evelyn's letter lay unfolded. I read it again, slowly this time, tracing each word. Finish what I couldn't. I whispered, I did. Then I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the suitcase and locked it. The brass key clicked shut, a small sound but final. I turned off the lights and lay down, staring at the ceiling as rain tapped gently on the glass. For the first time in years I didn't flinch at the sound. It wasn't a reminder anymore. It was a rhythm, steady, alive, cleansing. My eyes grew heavy, the kind of tired that only comes when the truth has finally been spoken aloud. Somewhere between waking and sleep, I heard Evelyn's voice again, faint, warm, steady. Don't let anyone make you small. I smiled in the dark. Not anymore. Morning light spilled through the thin motel curtains, pale and soft, brushing across the walls like forgiveness. For the first time in years I woke up without dread. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm. Outside, the air smelled like wet asphalt and pine, clean, almost new. I packed my few things into the suitcase, leaving the brass key on the nightstand. When I turned to look around one last time, I noticed something small on the table. A folded note written in Rita's sharp handwriting. It said, "You did what most people only dream about. You faced it." Beneath it lay a motel keychain, room 9, with a smiley face drawn beside the number. I smiled. It was her way of saying goodbye. Before leaving, I knocked on her door near the office. She opened it halfway, cigarette in hand, hair pinned up. "You leaving?" she asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "Finally." She nodded, eyes warm but tired. "Good. The world's bigger than this place, Maggie. Go make it notice you." Her voice cracked a little at the end, though she pretended it didn't. I stepped forward and hugged her, surprising us both. She froze for a second, then patted my back lightly. All right, she muttered. "Before I start crying, get out of here." The sky was still gray when I drove away. The road stretched ahead, glistening from last night's rain. For miles, I didn't turn on the radio. The rhythm of tires against pavement was enough. Somewhere between towns, I realized I hadn't thought about Mark or Lila for hours. Their names no longer echoed. They were just noise I'd finally tuned out. By the time I reached North Carolina again, the clouds had cleared. The pine trees looked greener, brighter, as if the world itself had been washed clean. When I turned down the narrow road toward Evelyn's house, something in me steadied. The house stood quiet beneath the sun, its paint still faded but no longer lonely. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like a waiting place. A house with room for new beginnings. I parked in the driveway and stepped out, suitcase in hand. Birds fluttered across the yard, landing on the porch railing where dust had settled thick. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was warm, gentle, faintly scented with cedar and old flowers. In the living room, the clock on the mantel had stopped again. I wound it carefully. The ticking returned, steady and alive. Sometimes you just have to remind broken things that they can still move. I spent the afternoon cleaning. Sweeping floors, washing dishes that hadn't seen water in months, opening windows to let the world back in. It wasn't about tidying up. It was about reclaiming something, not from Mark, not from the past, but from the version of myself who'd once believed her story was over. Around sunset, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea. The forest beyond the house glowed gold and green. I breathed in deeply. Peace had a smell. It was pine, soil, and the faint sweetness of tea leaves. A car pulled up just as the light began to fade. I turned, cautious, but it wasn't Mark. It was a mail truck. An older man climbed out, waving a small parcel. "Delivery for a Margaret Holt," he said. "That's me," I replied. He grinned. "Came through our backlog from months ago. Thought it might be important." I thanked him and took the small package. Inside was a single envelope. The return address was faded, but I recognized the careful handwriting. "Evelyn." My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the letter. "If this reaches you, then I trust my instincts were right. I always believed women like us don't end, we restart. You will find what you need, not in money or revenge, but in your own reflection when the world grows quiet. The house is yours now. Let it breathe again. Let yourself do the same." A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. I folded the letter, pressed it against my heart, and whispered, "I will." That night, I built a small fire in the old stone hearth. The crackling sound filled the house, the flames painting the walls in warm amber. I sat cross-legged on the rug with Evelyn's letters spread out around me, her handwriting, her voice, her truth. Every word reminded me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through the generations, waiting for someone to listen. Outside, the wind picked up again. It wasn't cold. It was alive. I closed my eyes and listened. For once, the silence didn't hurt. Over the next few weeks, I started fixing things little by little. A new coat of paint on the porch. Fresh curtains Evelyn had folded in a drawer years ago. I found an old photograph of her in the attic. Younger, smiling, holding a paintbrush just like I was now. I framed it and placed it on the mantel beside the clock. Now she was home again too. Neighbors started stopping by, curious about the woman who'd moved into the old Monroe place. They brought casseroles, flowers, stories. One woman, Nora, said, "That house has been empty too long. It's good to see life back in it." I smiled. It's good to be back in life. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the front window, hair wind-blown, sleeves rolled up, a faint smile that didn't look forced anymore. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd left her husband. She was the one who'd found herself after losing everything. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes, I came across a small tin labeled, "Property Donation Documents." Inside were signed transfer deeds. Evelyn had donated a portion of the land to a women's shelter charity years before her death. It was still active but struggling. I called them the next day. A woman named Teresa answered, surprised to hear from me. When I explained who I was, she said, "Evelyn helped us start. We still run small retreats for women leaving hard marriages or starting over. But we haven't had funding in months." By the time the call ended, the decision had already formed quietly inside me. The money Evelyn left, what was left of it after everything, would go to them. Not as penance. As continuation. A month later, the farmhouse's front room became a small retreat space for the program. New paint, fresh flowers, donated furniture. When the first group of women arrived, nervous, quiet, clutching small suitcases, I felt something shift again. They walked through the same doorway I had once entered broken. Now it welcomed them differently. The house had learned how to heal people. In the evenings when the others left, I'd sit on the porch with my tea and watch the light fade between the trees. Sometimes I'd talk to Evelyn out loud. "Look," I'd whisper. "It's breathing again." And I swear on those quiet nights the wind in the pines answered. One day Rita visited. She stood in the doorway looking around, eyes wide. "You weren't kidding," she said. "You really rebuilt the whole thing." I smiled. "Not rebuilt. Just reminded it what it was." She nodded approvingly. "You did that for yourself too, huh?" I laughed softly. "Trying to." Before she left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was the old motel keychain, the smiley face still drawn beside room 9. "Keep it," she said. "For luck." I hung it by the door. Looked right there, a piece of the road that had led me here. The next morning, sunlight flooded through the open windows. The clock on the mantel ticked steady. Birds sang somewhere beyond the trees. I stood there barefoot on the porch, the air cool against my skin. For the first time I wasn't waiting for anything. Not for revenge, not for forgiveness, not for closure. Just the next breath. I looked around, the porch, the garden, the quiet road, and whispered, "We're home." Not just Evelyn's home. Not just mine. Ours. A house of second chances. And when the wind rose again through the trees, it didn't sound like the past calling back. It sounded like the future finally opening its door. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional revenge stories where women rise, rebuild, and reclaim their power.